thank the Wave Energy Center for inviting me to moderate this very interesting panel about finance and investment. I will start by briefly presenting our speakers in the panel. We have on my right, on the first chair, Tina Solberg, Senior Sector Office at the Finance Mechanism Office for EEA and Norway Grants. Then we have Rui Ferreira, Executive Vice President at the venture capital firm Portugal Ventures. And then finally, Ruben Eiras, General Director of Sea Policy of the Portuguese Ministry of the Sea. We unfortunately had one more speaker that is a bit delayed, but maybe he can reach us in the middle. Okay, so I'll start by saying that, as we've heard this morning, Portugal has outstanding natural qualities for the development, testing, demonstration and validation of renewable offshore projects. These projects currently still require a very significant still entail very significant costs and thus require long-term investment with a strong public component. Then I will ask each of the speakers to share his or her view in respect of the financial mechanisms that are currently available for these type of projects, either at a national or international level. Okay, Ruben, please.
Good afternoon to you all, Mr. Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, Antonio, again, my congratulations for this event and for being a believer and a doer for the ocean renewable energy and also for the majority of what we can call the blue tech, I would say, area of technology. So I will be very, I would say, brief in the presentation, also to frame what we are doing in Portugal regarding what we can call the blue finance or blue finance solutions. So this is a map that is known by most of you. Is what is Portugal, a maritime area. So if the UN process goes forward, will be the second biggest maritime area in the European Union and the 9th in the world. It's a big business opportunity. It has to do, you have to do the business, of course, sustainably. And since we are here in an event that has as a partner Norway, you must bear in mind one more statistic, that Portugal and Norway, both EEZs combined, represent 50% of the Atlantic area. So here at the seminar, we are dealing with two countries that represent an area for business that is 50% of the Atlantic. So there is a lot of sustainable blue business to do. And when we talk about sustainability, is not to commit the same mistakes that was done in another, I would say, industrial revolutions, just to extract, exploit, and that's it. No, we have to go for what we can call a circular model, a sustainable model, but we have to go for a model that doesn't, I would say, exploit, but explore sustainably. And how to do that? Well, first of all, just to give you numbers, what has been the development of the blue economy in Portugal in the last 3-4 years. So we had the growth of the company's activities of about 40%, and which the main drivers were the exports with an increase of 25% of what we call the group of blue products between seafood and all the technologies and other products and services related to the blue economy. We also have another insight, is that the economy or the blue economy is much more productive than the overall economy. So the productivity is about 70% higher. And here we also have, let's say, another growth driver, that is our registry, also has some impressive numbers. But we have to do this in a sustainable way. Not only grow, but grow with, while respecting and protecting the environment. And here we have to do this with the triple helix of innovation, science, and technology to achieve what we can call the triple bottom line that defines the SDG 14 of the UN: people, planet, and profit. And here are some of the latest pictures of the latest developments. Some of them have been talked about today. The ocean renewables energy. There is also the trial of the offshore aquaculture cage, also in the north of Portugal. There is the seaforestation initiative between Portugal and Norway, and also the recent build of the World Explorer cruise ship that is the most sustainable cruise ship in the world to the moment. So summing up in terms of, conceptual framework, we need blue science, blue entrepreneurship, and blue innovation for achieving what we can call the blue capitalism or blue eco-capitalism. So a capitalism that is not a predatorial, but sustainable. And this is what are two platforms where Portugal and Norway are together. The High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy, which is an informal group of 14 countries, led by Norway, and the Sustainable Ocean Business Action Platform from the UN Global Compact, which also is led by Norway, with the participation of Portugal, which main aim is to mobilize the private sector to fulfill the SDG 14 of the UN, that is a sustainable ocean. What we are doing at the GPM for this. So when you talk about blue economy, and it's very, how to say, diffuse what can be categorized as blue economy. There are mature sectors like shipping and fisheries. Then there are emergent sectors like blue biotechnology or ocean renewable energies. And investors say, but where do I invest and where do I find the right information and accurate information for investing with the right context? So the GPM and the Minister of the Sea, what we are doing is trying to organize what we call the blue innovation ecosystem with the main aim of mitigating the risk of investment by decreasing the sector's information asymmetry. And we do this by, in this, as you can see in this chart, by conceptually connecting the ocean R&D network of our universities and R&D centers, public and private, that produce high qualified knowledge, try to, as I said, pick them and transform them into business ideas through ideation programs in our Blue Incubators network. Then those ideas that are more mature, that go out of those incubators or from other parts of the world, are then accelerated in acceleration programs. One example of them is the Blue Accelerator program, which we had the demo day last Friday, where we had, after 87 applications from 30 countries in the world, we had 11 startups that developed 18 pilots for the area of ports and shipping. With these results, 5 of them are already doing deals with the acceleration partners, with 5 companies in this acceleration program. And on the whole, the solutions will save about 41,000 tons of CO2, which is equivalent to 9,000 diesel cars. So fulfilling what is the main aim of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. Then those companies that are adequate for that can be and will be installed in the ports for having better access to to the, I would say, to the operations related to their blue business. So this then is facilitated by what we call our blue finance instruments, which includes the EE Grants Blue Growth Program, which the GPM is the program operator, then the Blue Fund, and all the other synergies with the public instruments and also private investors. Very rapidly, what we are doing. So we have non-refundable and refundable instruments. The EE Grants program is a non-refundable instrument. Most of it is focused in financing the business ventures in all the blue business sectors, and there is a sum for research and another for education. And then on the refundable, we are concentrating our instruments in the Blue Fund, where we are devising two new instruments, one with PME Investimentos. It will be a loan instrument with a low interest rate, and another one with Portugal Ventures, which Rui Ferreira is here, our partner, which is the Blue Economy Call, that has 11 million euros available. It is open until the 31st of December. And what is this experiment of blended finance? So Portugal Venture invests in equity, and we accompany that investment in equity with a loan. So with this, who is applying for the instrument gets two solutions in only one process. So it's simpler, it's more agile, and it's more transparent. Also, what we are doing is also to build an ocean investors network. So what we're doing with this, it's going to be a platform where public and private entities, to build blended finance solutions that augment what is the public resources, and also facilitates the investment from the private entities. Also, we will be, I would say, partners, the GPM of the Blue Invest platform from the European Commission that has a similar, I would say, aim in this issue. And also, we have the oceaninvest.pt portal, where it's a showroom of blue products and services from Portuguese companies or companies that operate in Portugal that fulfill the SDG goals from the UN, so sustainable blue products and services. So we do this and try to do this in an integrated way so that we can walk the talk, so that what we do as the promotion of the ecosystem has the instruments to finance, and also when deploying the finance instruments has a project pipeline that has where to apply. Also finalizing very rapidly to say that yesterday was the last meeting of the Portuguese presidency of the Atlantic Strategy Group that had the Atlantic Stakeholders Conference at the Business 2C event in Porto 3 weeks ago. And what was established is that there's going to be deployed a network of port accelerators centered in the floating offshore wind for the Atlantic space. So Portugal, Spain, France, UK, more or less, and Norway. To say that this also will be open to partner countries. So there is also a strong possibility for a country like Norway to participate in this network of port accelerators that will also have attached blue finance solutions. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are on the road to the UN Ocean Conference in June next year, and I think it will be a great opportunity to accelerate the deployment of sustainable ocean renewable energies, and blue tech. Thank you very much.
For this event, thank you to WavEC and Honor Vision Embassy for the invitation. It's a pleasure to me to be here. I would like only to make an initial statement why Portugal Ventures here. Ruben has made already a few steps on this and explained why we were invited. But as you may have noticed there, our investment is quite limited in terms of amount. We are a venture capitalist, public owned. But I would like to take the advantage to be here and to share with you a vision. What about the possibilities that from the investor side that is available to offer blended solutions to finance these kind of projects. And we are talking about, during this event, of offshore aquaculture and renewable energy. As the chair as stated in the initial introduction, we are facing here projects with a huge capital-intensive plans, and also from the amount needed to finance them, they are very peculiar projects in terms of the kind of investors they may have to invest on this kind of projects. So, what I would like to share with the colleagues and the assistants, two or three things to discussion. The first one is the kind of blended finance structure that is suitable for this kind of projects. First, long-term cash flows that these kind of projects are going to generate along the period. This is very attractive for a certain kind of investors, and we are leading with perhaps from the equity side, from the private equity side, not the venture capital side. Why? Because the private equity looks for investments with very stable cash flows in the future and a good perspective to take lower risker takers, if you allow me the expression. And of course they are return seekers. Not as a venture capitalist, because we are more risk takers as the private equity investors usually. Also we can have a more return as the other side of the equation. So the first thought here is what kind of investor looks for projects like this from the perspective of equity. Perhaps private equity is the most suitable for this, but venture capital looking for projects that are more in the pre-seed and seed phases, and also some growth phases of the investment. Starting from the pre-seed, Portugal Ventures has invested in the past in looking for projects like this that have good prototypes in terms of on these areas. Prototypes that are going to be very near to the market. And why very near to the market? Because they must be, with the timeline to the market opportunity should be shorter than the usual. Otherwise, we have to have another kind of funds that are looking only to invest in a certain kind of projects in terms of turning the scientific knowledge to a project near the market, what we call the MVP, the minimal viable product, okay? So this is the first thing, venture capital versus private equity. Perhaps venture capital is more suitable for the initial phases of these kind of projects, prototypes, knowledge, scientific knowledge, and also those ones who are very near to the market with minimum value products. Secondly, private equity, perhaps better. One thing here is just to give to the discussion is also the licensing problem of these kind of projects. Perhaps the time period of licensing is it's not so adequate to a risk taker or to a return seeker like an investor like us, okay? Mm-hmm. Perhaps the question, the balance between the licensing and also the technology involved and the intensity of the capital needs involved in a project. These must be put in a balance so that decision of investment should be should be taken. So, finally, the question that I would like to put here for discussion also is from the investor side's, again, perspective, it's the exit route. So, in a project, nothing happens, either from the perspective of venture capital or a private equity, if there is no exit route possible. So, we must look who is going to take our stake in the equity in the future. And this is very relevant in terms of the deal structure. If the deal structure has more equity, or perhaps you should combine also equity loan scheme, so that you can have a better exit route on this. And to finalize also this discussion, the grant systems, because they may help to this less risk taker from the investor's perspective.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it helps a lot as well. So I would like to give all these 3 or 4 hints for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we will now hear the perspective of the EEA grants in respect to this topic.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations also on a very interesting seminar today. Really interesting. I represent the Financial Mechanism Office, and we manage the EEA and Norway grants on behalf of the governments of Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And this is a collaboration between those 3 donors and 15 EU member states to firstly work towards reducing the economic and social disparities between the member states in the EU, but also to strengthen the bilateral collaboration between partners in these 15 member states, where Portugal is one, and Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And for the funding period 2014 and through 2021, these donors have put 2.8 billion euros on the table for funding within 5 priority sectors, and whereby innovation, business development, and the development of small and medium enterprises are prioritized, and where the Blue Growth program that Portugal has a program agreement on under these funds is one of them. I would also like to mention that under this priority sector, there is also funding available to strategic piloting of innovative solutions, both to strengthen the value creation under the business development, but also to come up with more environmentally friendly solutions. So, and this also bodes for cross collaboration, since there are different partners that are putting forward project proposals jointly. There is also scope for the exchange of knowledge and experience, such as this event and others. So there is a lot of room for coming up with very good and relevant solutions when we are tackling the challenges that we stand before. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that at this stage, and then we'll come back more into the details later.
Okay. Thank you very much then. My next question, starting from here, would be, what would you say from each of the different perspectives are the main features or characteristics that these type of projects, and I'm talking about offshore renewable aquaculture projects, should have in order to be eligible for funding under EEA, Norway grants, or the Blue Growth Mechanism? And also it would be interesting to hear the perspective of Rui as a venture capital firm. So, I don't know, who wants to start? Ruben?
Me? Okay. So, what is you know, I would say the cliche answer is every good project is financed, so the project has to be good. Well, Of course, it's a cliche, but there is a real good truth on it. But again, you have to be very, let's say, honest about what we are financing. So first of all, we are talking about two, let's say, areas. So in this case, ocean renewable energies and offshore aquaculture that, now they are reaching, a prematurity level where you already can have, some, let's say, business models that can have some kind of feasibility if there is, I would say, the conditions for it. But, for example, ocean renewable energies, their floating offshore wind is still, I would say, in terms of cost, is still very high when compared with the fixed offshore wind. But when you look at the learning curve of what has been, for example, the wind float Atlantic, it has been much faster than when compared with the fixed offshore wind or even the onshore wind. So, and this is the wind float technology, but also, for example, Norway is deploying Equinor, another kind of technology, which the cost, I would say, of production is almost, I would say, the same or very near what is previewed for the wind float Atlantic. So, what we are seeing here, so we are seeing that there is a convergence on the decreasing of acceleration of the learning curve. That would say that the projects that come to us in terms of what is the floating offshore wind should already meet these, I would say, standards that are being created by these projects, or better than this. So the room for, experimenting new concepts and so on, that I would take it away. I would take and I would choose, concepts that accelerate what this learning curve has done. If you go for wave energy, that is another stuff. So there, instruments like, for example, grants or de-risking instruments are the most appropriate. So we are still in the R&D phase. Here is floating offshore wind is an area where equity or venture capital or a kind of blending that we can have within several instruments can go and put that into place. Of course, here, and what Rui has brought about is the regulatory framework. So in this case, we're talking about not only licensing, but also the maritime special planning. I had the opportunity to participate in some of the meetings with the fishermen for the deployment of the wind float Atlantic. Of course, I'm not, I would say, reveal what was discussed in those meetings, but I want to share with you an insight of a fisherman that said, I know the sea is from everybody, but I arrived there first. So what this implies is that the maritime special planning that is done by the governments is key for making, I would say, the investment feasible. So the investor must know, or must have, the certainty that in that area is really possible and is, I would say, taken care of, that the deployment will be, I would say, not only feasible in the beginning, but there is, I would say, a political environment of relationship with the local stakeholders that will also facilitate in that way. And taking into account what also was said by the Minister of the Sea today in his speech, that we must go for the multi-use of the space. So if we have ocean renewable energies in the area, we must, I would say, devise, I would say, the configuration of the technology, and also that will have impact in what is financed, because it diversifies the revenue streams, and also decreases, and by that increases the rates of return. So if in the same area or the same project I can have aquaculture combined with renewables and other kinds of, I would say, of activities, of course that would be much more attractive to finance.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Rui, would you like to contribute?
Yes, from the perspectives, again, from the investor perspective, I think it's worth it to think about the 4 T's. First T, as Ruben said, technology. The project itself must have a real robust technology behind it. And with the proper intellectual property, with a patent eventually. Why? Because the investor looks for a unique technology that is not replicable by others, by the competitiveness.
Yes.
And the competitors are very, this is a very competitive sector here, both of them, okay? So they maybe have something really unique in terms of technology. And the technology stands for efficiency, probably in terms of the production after. So in order to give back the return of the project as fast as the project can, okay? So the technology must be really, must have associated a good assessment from the side of the investor. The second point is the traction of the project. The traction is how is the market conditions. And the market conditions is that, okay, are there the client, from the client's perspective, the contracts, they are reliable, they are sustainable, and the scalability of the project as well. So the traction is related not only with the base of the contracts, the client's contracts from the project, their sustainability and also scalability, in order to have the risk, the minimal risk involved in a project like this, and the maximum return as well. The other point is the time to market of the project. Again, the licensing must be in order as well. Also, the chance of to pilot projects, for instance, to invest a lot in pilot projects. At least in venture capital perspective, the pilots are the first opportunity from the promoter side to demonstrate how this technology works in the proper conditions, okay? So for us, it's very important to have those pilots ready. But the time to market should be adequated to this pilot's duration in terms of timeline. Not last forever, you know what I mean? So that those pilots, they should go in a rapid way to the real effective project and real clients. Not pilots, but effective clients. And finally, nothing of these 3 T's are possible without a proper team to lead the project. And the experienced teams are the most important thing that investors like us are looking for. The good projects without good teams are possible, but good projects with not so good teams are not possible and are not so reliable from our point of view. In a nutshell, I would say that in these specific sectors, besides these 4 T's, I think the investment amount, again, it's a really relevant issue for the investor. The ticket amount of each fund, perhaps the co-investment with several investors, private ones, or even with a public leverage of other instruments, are really the key point here to make good projects. Another thing is the market conditions themselves, not only the investment phase, but after. If something happens with the project, there must be always a plan B. Not to be stick on the initial business plan. There should be a plan B always, so that the management team should have an alternative what to do if the market conditions are not the same, if the technology doesn't work at all, even if it's really tested in the pilot phase. And finally, again, as I said before, the investor should have an exit route to sell their equity position. So perhaps the model of the intervention, financial intervention, should be also the key factor here. Perhaps I leave this to discussion as well. Less equity plus loan, or equity loan, as I said. But then we have the problems of the guarantee. What are the guarantees to sustain a loan, okay? But from the equity side, the most important thing is the return perspective and how we are going to make a good deal at the exit, and how long this is going to take.
That makes total sense. Thank you. Tina?
Yeah. I would like to stress that within the EA grants and Norway grants, we fund all three phases: very early research and development, testing and demonstrational projects, but also the support for almost market-ready technology that just needs the final support to reach the market. And I believe that in the very early phases and the testing and so forth, we need to also accept failure. But we definitely have to learn in terms of what went wrong, in terms of what we had planned and why it didn't go that way. So I think it's totally acceptable to see some failures, but we need to learn from them. But where we really want to see these innovative solutions, both green and blue, here in Portugal, is really serial production. You know, when companies are starting to serial produce and move away from just being a very interesting pilot project to be utilized at scale, and that's where we really want to get at. And Portugal has, as I mentioned, a few programs under the EA and Norway grants. But I think for this audience, it's particularly interesting to look at what we refer to as the Portugal Innovation Program, which is in fact, you called it the Blue Growth Program. So it has, I think we'll refer to it as the Blue Growth Program here in Portugal. And it has a total funding of 38 million euros in the financial mechanism period. And I mentioned earlier that the financial mechanism reaches from 2014 to 21, but the actual implementation on projects on the ground run, I think the last date for eligible expenditure is April in 2024. And Portugal has been very effective in launching calls and also attracting applications. So under this program, there has already been calls launched, but there are also forthcoming calls. And there is a specific priority on small and medium enterprises in some of these calls. And also for if there are private businesses applying, the maximum public ownership is up to 25%. And these calls are launched at our website, eagrants.org, and they will be launched or progressively as the program is being implemented. There is also, at least one of the calls under this program is related to research. So there are also eligibility for research organizations and institutes. But the eligibility of the applicants themselves are specified under each call. Yes, and there is also obviously a high priority on green technology and resource efficiency when it comes to these projects. There are also predefined projects under this program, and they are mainly research and training oriented, where Portuguese and Norwegian actors are collaborating on these fronts. But for us, it's very important to get at the real projects that have the potential to reach serial production commercially.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we still have the time for one last question before we move the questions to the audience. And so I would like to know your views, of each of you, as to the main factors that allow the attraction to Portugal of investment in these type of projects. And also, what could be improved?
Very good. I start?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Okay, there is a pattern here. So, first of all, and repeating what I said in my presentation, we have, in Portugal, our maritime area has a distinctive characteristic when we compare to other also countries that have big maritime areas, like, for example, the UK or France or the United States, is that our area is, continuous. So we have two archipelagos, Madeira and Azores. One is subtropical, Madeira. Another, Azores, is, a pure, Atlantic, North Atlantic climate, with also different biodiversity in each of these areas. And when we look to the Portugal mainland coast, is all an area you have colder waters in the north and less cold waters in the south, with also a big biodiversity in each one of them. So it's a continuous space, wide space, deep sea. Also, with when you consider, in this case, what we're talking about here, these two areas, when we look into the offshore renewable energies, ocean renewable energies, the industrial strategy for ocean renewable energies that was devised by the Ministry of the Sea in the last mandate points to a potential of 25% of our electricity can come from the ocean, from wave and floating offshore wind. So this is the equivalent to a coal power station. So of course this is a big challenge, because you have to do this sustainably, especially not in this case. The challenge is not environmental, but it is in the profit side. But also you have to take also account into one thing. This is the best part. Then there is another part that is in an issue that will probably come about regarding ocean renewable energy, and is already coming about, offshore aquaculture that is done near the shore. And of course, before I talk about this, the offshore aquaculture here also has a very interesting potential, not only because we have, let's say, very clean waters and very, let's say, rich in nutrients, but also because there is deep sea very near the coast. So you can have big, I would say, operations and offshore aquaculture operations that the ports logistically can be as a basis that can give logistical support in a very effective way and a very cost-effective way. Also, the diversity of places and locations that I described before makes it possible to have different kind of species that can be, let's say, harvested in an offshore, let's say, environment. In the case, for example, of Madeira Archipelago, and I have to be a disclaimer here, I am from Madeira, so I am pitching for my homeland. You have the possibility to have a subtropical area near, let's say, Europe. So you have an average temperature of 20 to 21 degrees in the temperature of the seawater during the whole year. So for some species, this is quite, I would say, an attractive and distinctive element when you also of having clean water. But there is one, I would say, element that has not been, I would say, analyzed, and this is more of also a risk factor. Is also the visual impact that these technologies have in the sea horizon. We are accustomed, and the tourism sector is one of the ways it, I would say, draws its revenue, is from the contemplative value of the sea. So we are, and we see also the big blue and the big blue horizon. Well, if you see the big blue with lots of wind, I would say, floating offshore wind turbines, I have some doubts that that will obviously be accepted by the ones who have activities that derive from that kind of value. And here you have a NIMBY effect. It was not in my backyard. So I'm in favor of renewable energy, but not in front of my sea horizon. So again, maritime spatial planning here is key, so that we can, is key by just one thing. This will change the metrics of value economic creation in many areas. So, and we have to manage that conflict, and also work with the local stakeholders to manage that change. So this kind of transition to sustainable economy also implies that we'll also have to have a different sea horizon that we have today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this insightful perspective. Rui or Tina, we don't need to stick to the previous order.
Let me go first. Just break up the order a little bit. Well, I think it's a very interesting question, because it allows you to think, towards the very end or the beginning of the pilot phase, when you're attracting investors. And I think the theme of today is really sort of blue solutions, but it's also, I've seen so many innovative solutions here, and having worked on public and private partnerships before with the aim of innovation, we use the definition of new, useful, and utilized. So it's not just stranding as a pilot. And in terms of, actually, there's a sort of a more informal joke in Norway that we're so good at innovating and innovating or producing innovation pilots that we have a pilot disease. We have more innovation pilots than the airlines Norwegian and SAS together. So it's really it's important to think beyond the first pilot, and how do we make use of all of these very good technologies that are being developed. So I think from my perspective, and trying to put myself in the place of an investor, I would definitely say that the volume to serial, or the market to serial produce for, is key. Is there enough volume there? A lot of the innovation that is happening in Norway is channeled through more strategic use of public procurement, for example, to create precisely that volume. That has happened, for example, on zero-emission construction sites, where it's too costly for some of the agents or the developers to shift out the whole machine park, for example. But if, for example, the public builders join forces and say, this is what we want, then it's much more attractive. So that's my first point, the volume to serial produce for. Secondly, I would like to also highlight predictability. It was mentioned earlier today, the predictability in terms of licensing. So that's not shifting the whole time. It's a more stable environment to innovate within. And also, I think this goes hand in hand with legislation, so that it's predictable for those who start a more long-term development. And I think in that phase, you also run upon a couple of hurdles in terms of, going forward with the innovation. And I think in those cases where there are regulatory hindrances, that there is an open door to the decision makers in terms of at least highlighting that these are hurdles for us. What are you willing to do in that case? If we, for example, change the legislation slightly, this might be very potential for both businesses and also the country in terms of the green solutions that might come about. But they might be stopped if the current legislation is staying. So I think that open door and the listening government is also very important. And lastly, I think incentives for the business is also very important. For example, if you compare business as usual with greener solutions, or in this case, green/blue solutions, there can also be a more rapid or accelerated development if there are incentives. If we look again to Norway, I'm from Norway, so this is experience-based, that there has been so many incentives for Norwegian people, but also firms, to change to electric cars. And we are doing that rapidly now. So I think that can also be something to think about.
Thank you very much. Okay. I would take your. I absolutely agree on your statements. I would say that this is a three-wheel project. I would say that Portugal should attract investment in these areas with the first wheel that Ruben has said. The natural resources are here. The regulatory framework is ready. And all the natural conditions to establish here projects are done. So, first of all. Second, we have the experience of countries like Norway, and this is a very interesting relationship with our country and your country in order that you can exchange the benchmark, the best cases, the best pilot you are doing there. And of course, there must be specialization here in order to set we may do differently, but perhaps in complementary way in that you are doing there, so that we can attract both, investment perhaps in a more articulated way. It is very interesting to have this benchmark as Norway, and as well as Iceland. It's another country that is involved here in the grants. But the main thing is that it's not enough in this first wheel to have this ready. You should have projects, anchor projects, already here, working, so that they can attract another smaller projects and to create a real value chain in this sector in order to attract other micro projects around them. What I call an ecosystem. We should create a really an ecosystem around these projects, and perhaps these are true in very interesting areas or sub-areas to create two fully ecosystems here with a worldwide differentiations here in Portugal. So I think with those three conditions accomplished, you can attract investors to Portugal, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now move to the audience. Do we have any questions? Over here.